Great. All right, well, thank you so much for being here today for the JSPG Editorial Open House. We're here to talk about the associate editor role and answer the questions that you had. Thank you for submitting questions through the form. Today, we'll have this brief presentation from some of our staff and editorial leadership, as well as Sam, who is an associate editor, and we'll talk about his experience. We've done our best to answer your questions that you submitted in this presentation, but of course, happy to answer more as that's what we're here for today. If you want this to be interactive, feel free to raise your hand as well as place questions in the chat if you'd like. And if there are any questions that we can't answer today, we'll write them down and get back to you. So I want to make sure we get your questions answered today. So by way of intro, my name is Adriana Bankston. I'm currently the CEO and managing publisher for the journal. By day, I'm a principal legislative analyst with the University of California, Federal Government Relations in DC. My contact is at the bottom, email and Twitter. Feel free to reach out as well as connect after this. And we'll go through a little bit of background about me and sort of what I think the benefits are of working with the journal, and tell you a little bit about the journal as well. So I've been with JSPG since October 2019 as Director of Communications and Outreach, then transitioned to Chief Outreach Officer role. And then I've been in this role as a CEO since May of this year. My role is essentially to oversee the journal, different aspects, empower and activate the world's next generation of science and technology policy decision makers through substantive, thoughtful, and relevant research, writing, and engagement. And as said, I oversee all aspects of the journal in partnership with the governing board, as well as our editorial leadership. And I focus mainly on partnership development and external relations, as well as leadership and supervision of staff and operations and fundraising. So from my perspective of having been with the journal since 2018 and sort of my own interest of empowering the next generation of policy leaders, what I think is most exciting about the journal is that for a lot of people who are going into the field, really the rising stars in policy, this is the first sort of stepping stone for them into the field, helping them to gain skills in policy research and writing and knowledge of, and also contributing to the global policy landscape. And also we organize a number of events and where we try to engage folks in the science policy community beyond just the publications themselves. And so we really look at professional development as well in policy and increasing visibility of authors post-publication. So just a brief background on the journal. I imagine there's some folks here who may be less familiar, and wanted to just give some background about the history of JSPG. So we've been around since 2011. And as I said, it's really been a stepping stone into the field for folks who are interested in policy. We are an international journal, open access and peer reviewed, as well as a 501c3. We serve as a vehicle for students and early career scholars to publish articles in science and technology policy in a variety of topics in a number of formats. And we also want to bolster their research and writing credentials. So we organize a number of events, webinars, workshops, and so on. And really want to engage them in policymaking debates at all levels of government, state, national, and international. So in that sense, we try to be more than just a journal. We don't want to be just a PDF on the website. And we really try to foster this professional development and involvement of the next generation in the debates that are going on at present in policy. So that happens through a number of workshops and webinars that we have through our issues, as well as other trainings during the year. All right, sorry about that. Okay, so this is sort of the general background. We publish a number of different formats, as you can see here: OPEDs, memos, technology assessments, so on. There are a number of topics listed here. Again, it's very broad on purpose, so we can cover a number of different areas in policy. And I can talk a little bit about, you can see more on the website as well, but I can talk a little bit about the issues that we've published so far and what we're thinking into next year. So typically we publish 2 standard issues and 2 to 4 special topics issues per year. Deadlines are usually May and November. And standard issues are open call for papers in all formats, covering any corner of science and technology policy. And special topics are specifically sponsored by a partnering organization and also focused in scope or topic. So they will be typically focused on a specific area of policy. So in 2021, we published our summer standard issue, which you can see here, which is our 10-year anniversary since 2011. And special issues that we published are on climate change solutions. This was sponsored by the United Kingdom Science and Innovation Network. Shaping the Future of Science Policy with AAAS and sponsored by the Kavli Foundation. And Intersectional Science Policy, which is sponsored by the National Science Policy Network. So there's quite a variety of topics, and we want to be timely and relevant to what's happening in the policy space at different levels, and also obviously fitting within our publication topics. So for next year, we currently have 2 standard issue deadlines of May 22nd and November 20th, and 2 calls for papers. One is for STEM education and workforce development that some of you might be interested in. This is sponsored by Sigma Xi and a number of outreach partners. The deadline is January 23rd. And Innovations in Science Diplomacy, which is sponsored by the Department of Science, Technology, Engineering, and Public Policy at the University College London. Again, there are a number of outreach partners in diplomacy here. The deadline is April 3rd. So we'll likely have at least one other special issue that is in process, but this is sort of what's coming for next year. So now moving on to the posting itself. You probably have all seen this on the website. As I mentioned, this is an opportunity for professional development. It's a part-time volunteer role for 1 year. Commitment varies roughly 1 to 3 hours per week. Some of our editors can tell you more about what that's like, sort of day to day. But it's, I would say, fairly low time commitment, but depends on the time of year and also how many articles you want to work on. The eligibility, which people always ask about, is for graduate students, postdocs, policy fellows, and other similar early career professionals. And so we would like you to stay in these positions or similar position for the next 12 months, so we can sort of see who the folks are in the first cohort, and I'll talk about that in a second. As I mentioned, we are international, so we will be looking to recruit editors from other countries as well, which we really haven't done intentionally as much in the past. But we do want to emphasize this aspect of JSPG being international in our recruitment as well, and also placing an additional emphasis on diversity and encouraging folks from different backgrounds to apply, and again, to really consider how diverse our pool of editors is. The experience, again, is not required that you have prior editing experience. Some science policy writing is helpful. We will ask you as part of the application to list areas of expertise and or interest in research and policy, so we can sort of gauge what you're working on, but also what you might be interested in editing, and so we can match you with the things that will help you also in your professional development. And obviously, for most people, their policy and research interests may not necessarily be the same. Typical things, we will ask you for a cover letter, resume, writing sample, and also we've added another step this year. We'll actually ask you to analyze an article, which you'll see once the application opens, to give you a little bit of a flavor of what this is like, but we also want to see how you do essentially in a short timeline and analyzing one of our articles as part of the application. So pretty straightforward. Happy to answer questions now or later once you start thinking about this or looking at the application. So this is what the timeline looks like for 2022. We plan to have 2 cohorts, you can see here the timeline for the application, and I'm happy to share the slides as well. For the first cohort, essentially goes from January 17 to March 6. So we typically close this 2 weeks after the AAAS meeting, because that's a good way for us to also get more applicants. So this is why it's March 6. Applications for the first cohort will open in January. If you're thinking about applying for the second cohort, this will be later in the year, sort of from July to August, and then you'll start in November. The dates are set to where the first cohorts would start prior to the standard summer deadline, which is May 22nd again. So you would onboard May 9th. For November 20th, you would onboard November 7th, roughly, and you can sort of see what the timeline looks like here. So we will sort of endeavor to keep this timeline as best we can, and also think about the timeline of our other issues around these cohorts to make sure that we're covered sort of year round with our issues, and people have things they can work on if they want to. So moving on to the editorial leadership, Rosie actually was not able to join us today, so I will go through the slide that she prepared for us. So Rosie is our editor-in-chief. She's a PhD candidate at WashU St. Louis, and you can see her contact here as well. So her tenure is, she was an associate editor in 2019. She then became an assistant editor-in-chief in 2019 until April 2021, and worked on 4 volumes, and then took over as editor-in-chief in April, so right before I started. And worked on 5 volumes. So all of the issues that you've seen that I've showed you, she led all of them. So her role is to oversee all of the editorial aspects of the journal, liaise with the CEO frequently on matters relating to editorial issues and broader strategy. She provides support to the assistant editors-in-chief, overseeing the different volumes, and also developing and reinforcing professional development for editorial board members. So this is something that we're sort of actively thinking through, developing more professional development and training for new editors coming on. So you'll see more of that into next year. And her insights as to benefits for editing for JSPG are literally being able to keep abreast of all the latest advancement in science policy globally, working alongside a talented pools of editors and individuals committed to science policy. JSPG is really the gold standard for peer-reviewed articles for early career researchers in science policy, and this is obviously something that's unique about the journal, that we do focus solely on early career. And then just overall, the organization is committed to excellence and considering looking at all aspects from the editorial procedure to professional development for editors, how we can make that better into next year. So with that, I'll turn it now over to Ben, who is our assistant editor-in-chief for Standard Edition, to tell you a little bit about his background.
Yeah, thank you, Adriana, and welcome to all of you guys. So my name is Ben. I'm a relatively new assistant editor-in-chief. I've been editing with the journal since 2016. I was an associate editor for 5 years, and then moved up to assistant editor-in-chief this past summer. And so while I was an associate editor, I was in grad school at the University of Maryland, and then I was a postdoc as well. And so I think it's a very doable thing, both in grad school and in postdoc. And now that I am, now I'm a full-time AAAS Science and Technology Policy Fellow, and it's still a very doable time commitment working a full-time job. And I think that's also really, I'm sure a lot of early career people in grad school and postdocs who are interested in science policy have an ideal path that is similar to mine, which is moving on to the AAAS fellowship. And I think being a JSPG editor and working with JSPG was definitely something that really helped me in that process. And I would really encourage you guys to apply to really get that policy experience. So as assistant editor-in-chief, I do a preliminary review of submitted articles. So everything that comes to us goes through the editor-in-chief and the editorial board. And then I organize the teams of associate editors for the article review. So there's two rounds of review that we'll go through. And those are led by teams of associate editors, two of them working together, one in the lead and one acting as a secondary. And though as an associate editor, you will be in direct contact with the author, and then you'll reach out to the assistant editor-in-chief if you have questions. And so I serve as a primary point of contact for the editors or for the authors if they have questions. And if it needs to be bumped up to Rosie, our editor-in-chief, then I'll rope her in as well. And then after the review process, I go through again and I finalize and complete and submit the manuscripts, and they go online and we publish them. And so as an associate editor, you will be working with a partner to edit 4 to 8 articles per year, depending on how many issues and how many special issues we have that year. Per issue, each associate editor generally works on 2 articles. So one where they're a primary and one where they're a secondary. And I would say the most important skill to have as an associate editor is timely communication. And so that's between you and your co-editor, the authors and yourself and me. Everything is done in 2 to 4 week cycles basically. And so it's not it's not super fast, but it's fast enough that if someone drops off the map for a week, something can get behind. So that's something that we really prioritize, and it's a good skill to bring both to the journal and moving forward. And then the other thing is just basic editing skills. It's something that you can definitely grow into as an associate editor and while working with your partner editor. And I think aside from those skills, you just have to be able to think critically about the article that you're reviewing. We review for grammatical and word and writing style and stuff like that, but it's also about how cohesive their arguments are and whether there needs to be more background, or if they've given sufficient reason for the policy options that have been chosen. And those are less about your own editing skills and more about whether you can think about the article and can understand and critique it. And so, in addition to helping you transition to a science policy career, it's editing for JSPG really just helps you gain a very broad knowledge of science policy outside of your realm of expertise. So I'm, by training a cancer researcher. I don't think I have ever edited a cancer policy article for JSPG, but I really enjoyed learning about everything outside. And, I didn't want to stay a cancer researcher, and I didn't want to do cancer policy. And so being able to say that I had read widely in those realms and thought widely in those realms, I think is very beneficial. And then finally, it's also just great to make connections with other early career science policy people. Through my relationship with JSPG and through being an associate editor, I was able to network and meet other people who I wrote other things with. And so in grad school, I met groups that were trying to submit op-eds in support of scientific research and scientific funding in actual newspapers, and published op-eds in newspapers through people that I met with people who I met through JSPG. And these are just great experiences to develop your own communication skills, your own science policy skills, and everything in between. So it's been a really rewarding process for me, both as an associate editor and especially now that I have moved on to assistant editor-in-chief. And I really encourage you to apply, no matter, if you're a PhD student, if you're a grad student, if you're already a science policy fellow, we would love to have you as well, because you bring a whole other set of skills that are in demand and great. And so I really hope to see you on a review panel with me sometime soon.
Great, thanks, Ben. So let's move on to Andy. So Andy's our assistant editor-in-chief for special editions.
Thanks, Adriana. I've seen a few questions in the chat, and I think I saw Luis raise his hand. Luis raised their hand. If we'll get to questions at the end. We'll just go ahead and finish up these bios, and hopefully Des will answer some of your questions. We'll anticipate some of those, and then we'll get to the rest later. As Adriana mentioned, I am the Assistant Editor-in-Chief for Special Editions. I've been in that role since the summer, and before that I was an Associate Editor. Throughout that time, I've been pursuing my PhD at Cornell University, and similar to Ben, I found it to be a very manageable workload to be able to focus on my graduate studies, but also be meaningfully engaged with JSPG. A lot of my role is relatively similar to Ben's. Ben focuses on the standard editions, I focus on the special editions. So I'll give you a walkthrough of what the process might look like for you when you're editing an article, but also just talk about the differences between standard editions and special editions. So what that is, namely, is that the special editions are partnerships with external bodies. And so that gives us some opportunities to either explore more niche topics, such as we had a special edition for COP26. We have an upcoming special edition on STEM education workforce development. But it also allows us to do some exciting opportunities for authors, such as memo competitions, where we get to award cash prizes to authors. So as an associate editor, you'll get to work on both standard editions and special editions. Your actual role with that won't be much different, just the content will change. And but I'll assist you in a number of ways throughout that process. So as we alluded to with Rosie and with Ben, we're developing training modules to help you build your editing skills. Right now, that includes an editorial handbook that'll give you all the JSPG guidelines, as well as some tips about walking you through editing an article. We're also recording some videos, both on data visualization, on what it's like to edit, on things to look for, on just our formatting and copy editing process as well. And then, but that also translates to the editorial process writ large. So I have this rough schematic shown here of what that looks like. So basically what happens is a bunch of people will submit articles for a given issue. The editorial leadership, the first way the editorial leadership assists you is we do a desk review. What that means is that we take out all the articles that aren't really relevant. Either they didn't meet specific guidelines for the issue, maybe they're off topic, or they're not really just like up to snuff, so that you don't have to worry about those easy rejects. Then associate editors will do an initial review. So we'll give you an anonymized group of articles on the order of 6 to 12, depending on the size of the issue and how many editors are there. And your goal here will be just to quickly read through and give us your broad feedback. What's working, what's not working? Is it a strong argument? Is it relevant to the topic? Things like that. Then we'll assist you by compiling all those results and deciding what gets accepted into the issue. Then, as Ben mentioned, you'll be paired with another associate editor, and you'll start actually doing the editing. So you'll go through, you'll look for any grammatical and technical mistakes, as well as just like really getting into the argument and saying like, what ways, where is this unclear? What ways can we sharpen this argument and make it better? You'll give that back to the authors. They'll try to incorporate your changes. Then we're instituting a new thing where the editorial leadership will assist you further. We'll give you some high-level review at this stage, sort of say like things that we might have noticed that the authors need to change, give you feedback on your editing style to try to help you build these muscles and develop as an editor. Then you'll go through the editing with the authors again, and then you'll work on formatting, and we'll help you with the publication prep. So I do a round of copy edits and things like that. And then one thing that I might add about the unique opportunities with special editions is sometimes authors have really interesting ideas. So for instance, we had this special edition on the future of science policy. And the authors were advocating for changing, getting away from English as the assumed language of science writing. And so they actually translated the article into multiple languages. And so it was a fun and challenging task to sort of go through that editing process and the copy editing process for that. And so those are some of the interesting and exciting things that you might bump into with the special editions. Now I'll just talk a little bit about what I think you'll gain from being an associate editor at JSPG. A lot of people asked whether or not you'll be aligned with your expertise as an associate editor. In some cases, yes, you really won't be like the actual area of your expertise, but you might be adjacent to it. In an ideal world, we try to match people to that. So you sort of get to deepen that expertise and learn about things that are really adjacent to the issues you care about. But more likely than not, you're not going to be paired. You're not going to be assigned to an article where you have an expertise, right? You're going to learn how to translate both your scientific and policy analysis to areas outside your expertise. expertise so that you have a complex and adaptive skill set. This kind of adaptability is really important in the science policy world, and we're asked as scientists and as researchers to sort of apply that mindset to new problems and to understand where an argument or research is failing, even if we're not intimately familiar with that technical work. And so we try to help you develop that skill set. We try to help you grow in that capacity to be able to bring that analysis to bear on a topic you might not be familiar with. And I think this is one of the most enriching parts of working at the journal, because you really get exposed to so many different issues at the intersection of science and policy, and really get work up that ability to understand them and think about them critically. Another thing is just as an editor, you'll think about writing differently, right? As researchers, we tend to, in early career professionals, we often will write in this sort of academic way that is very different from broad audience writing. And while you practicing that, writing op-eds and things like that is a great way to learn those differences, I think editing is actually the best way to do it. Looking at someone else's paper, someone else's article, and understanding the mistakes they're making, understanding the strengths that they have, and how different articles and arguments and narratives can be built in this different kind of writing. And finally, I think all of this is a really marketable skill set. Even if you're not going into policy per se, even if you're going to stay in a traditional academic career path or stay in research, these are really marketable skills, right? This is strong writing, this is strong editing, this is a deep analysis, and I think it'll be useful for you in whatever career path you choose to take.
Great, thank you, Andy. So last but not least, I will turn it over to Sam, who is one of our current editors.
Hi, everyone. My name is Sam Mahanes. I'm a PhD student at the University of California at Irvine and an associate editor at JSPG. Here on the left is me in my natural habitat. I'm a marine biologist. I work mostly on seaweeds. I'll come back to that in just a second. But I didn't realize how much I was going to have to follow up on. There have been some great points raised, and I'm going to try to kind of support some of those, because a lot of those were exactly the things I was going to bring up. So on the right, I laid out three examples of memos that I've edited as an associate editor at JSPG. The top one is about monitoring by different countries in the Arctic. The second is about climate change resilience in infrastructure near the Great Lakes. And the third one is about reducing urban heat island effects in affordable housing in Boston. Now, you may notice that none of these have anything to do with seaweeds. And that at first was a little bit intimidating, where I'm being asked to edit something where I don't necessarily have a background on that subject. But as soon as I hit my stride with that, it's been a really, really incredible experience. Working as an associate editor, you really get to dip your toe into a bunch of different kind of fields of science, fields of policy, sample things that you may say, oh, that was fun. It was fun working with those people. I'm not sure I want to go into housing policy. Cross that one off this long possible list. And some things where you realize that this is potentially like a really interesting career trajectory, and now you have at least some kind of some working knowledge of that field. So to pull back a little bit, I've been at JSPG since spring of 2020, and I've had the opportunity to edit 8 policy memos. So that means between 2 and 5 authors per memo, maybe occasionally 1. So now I've worked with maybe 40, 50 different early career researchers, early career professionals. Some of those people I've bumped into at the National Science Policy Symposium, at different networking events. And so working at JSPG has been a really, really helpful way for me to kind of break into the science policy community. As Ben also mentioned, kind of just getting to know people, seeing them around, maybe getting to collaborate with them sometime down the road. To circle back around to this kind of flexible skill set and being able to hop into a different topic and kind of hit the ground running, I recently applied to the Christine Rezayan Science and Technology Policy Graduate Fellowship and had an informational interview prior to applying with one of the directors who would potentially accept a fellow. And the one thing that kept coming up was how important it is to have that kind of flexibility, because they weren't looking for someone who would come in and work on a specific project. They didn't know 9 to 10 months out what the projects would probably be. They were looking for people who were flexible and could be given information, be given a prompt, be given a project, and kind of hit the ground running, quickly familiarize themselves with kind of this new field of science and policy. So that really hit home to me, how much I've learned and how much I've developed kind of that part of my skill set while at JSPG. And as just a closing, I've really enjoyed my time working and being able to kind of get crash course tutorials on all of these different types of policy, and been able to collaborate with some really great people. And that's it for me.
Great, thanks, Sam. So that's the last slide we have. Hopefully that was a useful background. I saw there are some questions in the chat, so let me go through that first. Okay. Could the recording be shared? Okay, I can share that. Yeah, so the 1 year. This. I believe that we have been able to extend the current postings for folks who have been here for 1 year. Maybe Andy and Ben can speak to this, how that works with the 1 year.
Yeah, I'll just chime in briefly. So historically, it's very simple to extend the contract. We don't expect you to reapply in that case if you've been doing a good work. One of the benefits of the high-level review that I mentioned is that we'll have more of an opportunity to see where you're at with the journal. And so if it's something where you've been struggling, we might sort of start that kind of conversation. But by and large, as we're trying to give you tools to succeed and support you as much as we can. And so to the extent that you're available, we would love to be able to support you as an associator for a long time. As you can see, Ben was an associator for a long time. Sam's been one for longer than a year, and I've been with the journal longer than a year.
Okay, Christopher is asking about the peer review process. Would one of you want to take that?
Yeah, I can take that. So you're correct in that associate editors are closer to a traditional peer review process. I would say it bridges between a peer review and a traditional like editing role. So it's going to depend on the quality of the submission, how much it has to be edited for writing style, but there is always work that needs to be done there. And that's something that, editors will always have work to do there. So there's two, generally in the second review, which is the one that is more hands-on for the associate editors, they'll go through 2 iterations. And one is a more like high level. Do your arguments make sense? Do you have enough background? Is this the right format of the article that you've chosen? That sort of thing. So that one is closer to maybe a peer review process. And then it goes back to the authors. And when it comes back, you do a more nitty gritty grammar, writing, references, format. It's the more painful one to work on because it's, really getting down to the details. And then that's what puts it into a real, publishable professional format. And so I would say it's kind of both.
Adriana, you're muted, I think.
Sorry, thank you. So next question, how many positions are open each year? So I believe we have about 20 right now. So this is something that we'll evaluate next year with this 2 cohort model. Partly will be due to sort of how much assistance we need, and Andy and Ben will need for all the different issues coming up. And also we want to be selective to an extent. So it's hard to say at this point, but we'll have to see how things go.
One thing I'll add is that JSPG is growing. We're anticipating this in 2022 to publish more issues in the single calendar year than we've ever published before. And so part of that is why we have this 2 cohort model that Adriana's mentioning. So we're we'll be hiring a bunch of a bunch of associate editors here in the spring, and then we'll do it again in the fall. So over the course of the year, we're expecting to hire quite a few. We don't have a specific number yet, because that partially ties in with how many special editions we actually end up making partnerships to support.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Okay. Are there conflicts of interest if you're AAAS fellow and work for government or certain departments, agencies? Okay, Ben, you could probably answer that one.
Yeah. So as I mentioned earlier, I am a AAAS fellow. I am with the DoD. And so that means I'm also an ORISE fellow. And so I had no issues. What happened is I emailed AAAS and ORISE and got my mentor's permission, and they all said it was okay. And so it was okay. But it's going to depend on your specific office and what your mentor says, because there's always, it's going to be case by case, but I didn't have any issues.
Right. Okay. So we already answered the number question. What type of writing sample? So I think this has varied in the past, even if you had things like a blog or anything that was not academic, so we can sort of see how you're writing. I haven't been through the process of evaluating this myself, so I imagine some people did submit memos if they have them, but I think we would probably take other sort of writing samples as well.
I could quickly speak to that. At least a year and a half ago ish, when I applied, I used a part of a manuscript I've been writing that was for a broad scientific audience, but not fully a policy audience. So in my experience, at least, it didn't have to be policy specific.
The analysis. So I'll share the link to the application, the website, which does talk a little bit about, we'll basically ask you a few questions about the article to analyze sort of pros and cons, different opinions, and sort of, do you agree with the author? What would you do differently? That sort of thing. So it really is an analysis part of the process. And I'll share the link again to the posting so you can see the questions on there. But given we haven't opened it yet, so we haven't shared everything, but you can sort of think about these questions ahead of time. Okay, what do you most look forward to about your role? Would like to take that first.
I can start. I mean, as an associate editor, I really enjoyed the breadth of the topics I got to read about. If you're like the right kind of nerd, then you're reading science policy articles instead of science articles when you're in lab. And so this just gave me more of an excuse to do that. And now as assistant editor-in-chief, I get to do that at a broader level, but also I really enjoy being in a leadership role and working with the associate editors themselves. It was, I still work with the authors, but now I get to work with the entire editorial board instead of just my one partner. And that's really great to do. It's a delight.
I'll just add on to that, yeah, it's the learning aspect is very fun and very exciting. And also, just as an associate editor, just seeing the article grow, you get this initial submission that is, a little rough around the edges, but it's like, it's good enough to get accepted. But then your input and your engagement with the authors and that dialogue is what changes it into something more substantial, usually deeper, usually longer, usually more complex. And seeing that process, seeing that finished product, especially when it gets formatted into the JSPG template, I think is really exciting and always makes me feel like, wow, that was cool. That was like, it really grew.
Sam, what's your answer?
Right at the beginning, when you're first reading through an article, where, as Ben said, it might be a little bit rough, but there are maybe ideas that you haven't encountered before, which is just really fun and always kind of a rush for me. But also, as Andy was saying, when the article finally gets published, or when you just finish the entire editorial process and you're submitting for publication, the author's excitement is always really fun because they're excited to publish. This is a big thing, and you get to be part of that, which is really nice.
Great. Okay. Now there's specific questions. Do you choose if you work on the standard or special issues, or both? You guys can speak to this.
Go ahead. It's really just availability. As Ben mentioned, we're wanting you to get about 8 articles that you said a year. And so it's just sort of mixing and matching when people are available. So we'll have, we're estimating more special editions than standard editions, so it's more likely that you'll work on a special edition, but really in terms of your process of editorial work, it shouldn't be any different.
Yeah. I think you missed one, Adriana. Do you recommend third-party research paper writing services for the authors, as is often done in traditional peer review process? And we don't. I think that's one of the roles that the associate editor and the editorial boards take, is polishing writing in that way. In part because that's the what we want to contribute to the process, but also, not everybody can afford a third-party research service, and we don't want to restrict people. We want it to be as equitable as possible.
Yeah, so similar question. Articles are not sent out for external peer review. Yes, editors are not responsible for finding other reviewers. So no, you are the reviewers.
Yeah, I just might double up on that. So someone was asking about whether or not we use external peer review in our process, and no, the whole process is internal between the associate editors and the editorial leadership. There were also, it looks like, a couple of other questions about the writing sample, and most of this you can look at on the application posting, but we don't have any limitations on whether or not you're the sole author. It's usually a little bit easier for us to tell that what your contribution was as the sole author. But when I applied as an associate editor, I was one of 3 authors. I was first author, but I was one of 3. And I don't believe we have any requirements on the writing sample, but try to keep it, short. I mean, the goal isn't for us to see like the full scope of something. Is to see writing basics and the arc of an argument. So as much as you can present something that like feels contained but isn't a sprawling 50-page epic, that'd be ideal. Also looking for brevity in the ideal case.
Yeah, and I just shared the link to the posting again with the analysis. So if you go to the very bottom, you'll see more about the writing sample and analysis. So this is pasted from there. But again, this is sort of the thinking analysis piece of it. That will be part of this. Okay. If we don't get this position, can we submit articles? Yes.
Yeah, just to jump on the end of that, you can only submit articles if you're not an editor. We don't accept articles from our associate editors because it would be a conflict of interest. So just be aware that if you become an associate editor, you won't be able to submit to JSPG.
So I will also add that we have two deadlines coming up before you would become an associate editor. So there are still two opportunities in 2022 where you could submit an article and have it published and then become a joiner as an associate editor, even in this first cohort, let alone in the second cohort.
Yeah, and this is something that has come up in the past year, as far as folks who submitted and then they came on board. And so we were able to highlight that contribution in terms of saying, okay, this was accepted essentially before you took on the role as an editor, that's acceptable. And then we put a disclaimer to make sure that you are not publishing while you're also editing. But if you submitted and it was accepted before you took on the role, that's fine. So it's either or. Yeah. Okay, I think that's all the questions in here. Other questions? And I know we have some folks here who are editors or they were in the past. So if you'd like to say anything from your experience, please feel free.
We just got another question here, Adriana. What is the date of the term for each cohort?
Yes, so since it's roughly June starting, so cohort 1 will be starting in probably mid-May actually until mid-May of next year, and then second will be early November to November next year. So it's a little bit different from before, just because we want to onboard you before we actually start the issue deadline comes up. So it's a little bit sooner than before.
We do not charge article processing fees. Everybody is here on a voluntary basis, and then editorial applications will not be reviewed on a rolling basis. We'll start reviewing after the deadline.
Great, thanks, Delara. So yeah, we encourage you to also reach out to folks who are editors currently if you have questions. I'm sure they'd be happy to speak with you. Let's see, I think some of the things that have come up, one thing I wanted to bring up with sort of where people go afterwards. So one example, actually, Lyda Benenson, who's on our governing board, was one of our, I think, our second editor-in-chief. And so she's been involved with the journal ever since and has helped in her capacity on the governing board now. So people do tend to come back and help in other capacities after their term is over as well. Yes, the contacts, so I believe all of their LinkedIn profiles are online, so you can reach out to them that way. I'm happy to share their emails as well if you'd like to reach out to a specific person. Let's see, who else is here? One other question.
Tara asked a good question about timing your application relative to being eligible or not eligible as an associate editor. So the spring cohort of associate editors will review the May 22 issue. So if that's the issue that you're targeting for publication, I would recommend that you apply to be an associate editor in the second cohort, because most likely you will be assigned as an editor on that issue, and so you wouldn't be able to participate in that capacity. Because you would be screening your own article as part of the review process.
Yeah, and that'll hopefully alleviate some of these things with folks who want to submit and or be editors, that we now have 2 opportunities to do this during the year. So
there's a question for the regular issue, what's the percentage of international versus national? I don't have those statistics on the top of my head, but I will say right now it is majority national, but it's a thing we're trying to grow. We're trying to broaden our scope.
And part of that is with the specific partnerships that we're making. So one of the special issues we have coming up is in partnership with University College London, as well as several other European organizations. And we're looking to make that really global in the future. And so we're looking for more partnerships, including in South America and Africa and Asia and beyond. But right now, our traditional focus has been more towards the US, but that's definitely something we're growing towards.
National versus international is, I guess, dependent on where you actually are. So if you're submitting from, a school in London or in South America or something, then we will count you as international. This is your article, right, Andy?
Yeah, this was mainly me. It was fun and incredibly challenging. Getting used to, it was a lot of understanding the different Microsoft Word techniques for different languages. I mean, the article was in Spanish, French, Arabic, Greek, and Hindi, in addition to English in the original instance. So part of it also was sort of understanding what process we wanted to take, right? Because we initially, this was an idea that the authors had from the start. It was a great idea, but the problem was we wanted to make sure that it was incorporating our editorial input. So rather than translating the initial issue, we went through the full editorial process, the initial submission, we went through the full editorial process, and then we handed it off to the translators. And it was a fun back and forth of making sure everything lined up well and translated to the right formatting. It was a lot of that kind of dialogue of making sure that we weren't making mistakes, that we were still honoring the JSPG formatting guidelines, but also, obviously the conventions of the given language. So it was definitely difficult, but it was a very fun process where I think the editors really excited. And, we were really trying to, we wanted it to be all submitted at once, all published at the same time, to have that impact of this is, really walking the walk of what the article was about. And so it was a very fun period, and just one of these like fun policy things where everybody just like comes together, and at the last minute everyone's working hard and being very responsive. And so it ties back to what Ben was saying, where as an editor it really is necessary to be a good communicator, to be responsive, because sometimes we'll have something like this, and this is a really incredible exception. This is the only time JSPG has done this, but it was a very fun process of quick back and forth to making sure everything was working well.
Although I will say that this has come up ever since then, because there seems to be interest from other groups, especially international, to publish in other languages, which makes sense. We may do it again. We'll see.
Yeah, I hope we do it again. It was a fun experience, and I think they made a very compelling argument that everything shouldn't just be in English. So, and I think as we expand into this international focus, this is one of the ways that we can honor that mission.
Do you know where people end up, Adriana? My gut is that people don't just end up in science policy, and this is a great place to gain some communications experience as well, or even to stay in science and just diversify your own interests. I think we've had a lot of editors over the past 10 years, and I'm sure not all of them are science policy professionals now.
Yes, I think it's a broad variety. That's something that we're actually looking at, sort of tracking now, where people have gone sort of creating more of a database of folks, but there's definitely people who are in all sorts of careers and have used this experience to transition. Yeah, and as Ben said, it's a useful experience for a lot of different fields. There's another question.
We do use software for plagiarism screening, cross-check. Is that the one we use, Adriana? But hasn't been an issue yet. Hopefully won't ever be one.
Hasn't been one in 10 years, so
yeah.
Guess it's working. Yeah. Applications from national research institutions.
I guess whoever asked that question, send us an email with a bit more detail about your situation, and we'll let you know. I think say if you are a postdoc at NIH, then, and you're trying to apply to be an associate fellow, then yes, you would be eligible. Mm-hmm. But if you have any questions about your eligibility, just shoot us an email and we'll clarify for you. And we have a question here, Adriana. How do you decide special topic issues?
Yes, great question. So I think what I would say is we want to be timely and relevant, as I said, to what's happening sort of in the policy space. So we chose the STEM education because a lot of, pandemic has impacted a lot of trainees, and this is on the minds of a lot of people that I think is very relevant as far as what this will all look like post-pandemic. And so, there's been a lot of things with the state of the research enterprise and higher education in the pandemic. So again, it's very timely. The diplomacy, again, is something we haven't done. So part of it is we're trying to explore new territories and topics that we haven't done before. And this is, again, it's a very hot topic right now. And like I said, we have a number of international groups on the issue who are interested and really, at the forefront of what's going on in the field right now. So I think will be exciting. And so far, we've already gotten some interest on the issue. So hopefully we will, you can check out the link for that as well. We'll have some events coming up early in the new year to think about what are the sort of hot topics in diplomacy, and we'll have a writing workshop. And so keep an eye out for those things. But yeah, that's generally how we do it, is we want to be really sort of at the forefront of what's happening and involve folks who are doing those things. And so far it's been successful. All right, great. Yeah, do email us. I'll put my email in the chat as well. All right, well, we're right on time, it looks like. Any last comments? Any last questions?
Just want to add again, thanks everyone for coming. It was a pleasure getting to talk with you and talk about this journal that I've really enjoyed being a part of for the last year and change. And I really hope you'll consider applying, and feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions that we can help with.
Yeah, second Andy. I hope to see many of you on our editorial board in the coming year.
All right, thanks everybody for joining. Have a good night.
Thank you.